My name is Renata Calder. Everyone calls me Nita. I'm 33 years old. 3 weeks after my daughter's adoption was finalized, I stood in my own kitchen holding her against my shoulder while my mother told me to pack. Not asked. Told. My brother's family needed the house, she said, and I could find a rental, because I was strong and they mattered more. She said it the way you'd read out a bus schedule. There was one detail my family had somehow managed to forget in all their careful planning. One line of print, on one piece of paper, filed at the county recorder's office. What my mother did to my daughter's room 2 weeks later still makes my hands go cold. And what I finally said through the intercom that Sunday morning is the reason her phone ended up in pieces on my front walk. Welcome to Hidden Chapters, where the quiet ones finally get their say. If stories about family, boundaries, and the price of finally saying no speak to you, drop a comment and subscribe, because this one starts in a kitchen that belonged to me. Before that kitchen scene can mean anything, though, you should meet the woman who paid for the kitchen. I've flown as a helicopter flight paramedic out of a regional trauma base near Grand Rapids for 11 years. It's exactly what it sounds like. Bad highway accidents, farm equipment injuries, cardiac patients too far from a cath lab, all of it delivered through a headset over rotor noise, and panic is a luxury the job doesn't budget for. I put myself through paramedic school on loans and double shifts at an urgent care, and nobody in my family came to my certification ceremony, because my brother Marcus had a travel hockey tournament that same weekend. In the Calder family, that's just how the math always worked. I was the strong one. That was my title, my whole job description, and I learned it the way you learn a sentence handed down and repeated so many times it stops sounding like an opinion. When Marcus needed money for his wedding, the strong one loaned it, and we all quietly understood that loaned meant given. When our father died 3 years ago and my mother couldn't cover her mortgage alone for a stretch, the strong one had savings, didn't she? Whatever broke, leaked, or cried in that family got passed to me the way you pass a dish to whoever's standing closest to the sink. Here's the confession this whole story turns on. I liked it, at least for a while. Being needed was the only currency my family ever accepted from me, so I kept paying it, year after year, and told myself the invoice would eventually come back marked with love. My mother has said a great many things to me since that spring. But the truest sentence anyone ever said about me came from my coworker Denise, in the crew lounge at the base, headset still around her neck. She said, "Nita, you've been tipping people your whole life just for the privilege of sitting at their table." It took an infant and a moving truck for me to understand she was right. The house came before my daughter, and I want you to know exactly what it cost, because everyone in this story would later get very casual about that fact. 6 years ago, at 27, I signed for a small brick bungalow on Larkspur Court, a tired little place with good bones and a porch that sagged like a kind, patient face. The down payment was built out of holiday shifts and hazard differentials. 6 years of Christmases worked so paramedics with kids could stay home with theirs, every extra call-out tracked in a spreadsheet I kept like scripture. My name went on the deed. My name went on the mortgage. The first night I slept there, I lay on the floor of the empty living room because I had a house before I had a couch, and I felt something I had never once felt at any Calder family table. Landed. Mine. 2 years ago, when our father died of a heart attack in his sleep, my mother moved into my downstairs guest room, and I never once charged her a dime, never wanted to. But somewhere in those 2 years, a quiet renaming happened. At her church, to her sisters, on the phone with my Aunt Colleen, my house became the family house. Not Nita's house. The family house. As if it had been carried down a bloodline instead of carried out of my paychecks one exhausted overnight shift at a time. I noticed it. I even corrected it gently, once or twice, and got the little laugh, the wave of the hand. "You're so touchy about paperwork, Nita." Remember that phrase, because it comes back. My daughter Iris came home to me 3 weeks before that kitchen conversation, after 4 years of foster placements, home studies, and 2 adoptions that had fallen through before this one held. She was 2 years old the day the judge signed the final order, and I have never in my life been so terrified and so certain in the same breath. Here's what nobody tells you about being a flight paramedic who becomes a mother in her 30s. You know exactly how fragile everything is. You count breathing rates for a living, and then you go home and heal the same as anyone else, which is to say slowly, one-handed, on almost no sleep. I want to be fair about those first weeks. My mother helped. She cooked. She did laundry. She held Iris so I could shower. But help in Diane Calder's hands was never actually free. It was scaffolding, and scaffolding goes up around a thing so it can be worked on. She had opinions about the daycare schedule, about the thermostat, about the little room I'd painted a soft sage green for Iris. I'd learned years earlier how to hold a boundary with her. I'd had to. When she offered to manage my checking account after Iris came home, I said no, warmly, twice. When she rearranged my kitchen cabinets, I put everything back without a word. Small stuff, I told myself. Grief and new grandchildren make people restless. Then, on a Tuesday morning in late spring, my brother lost his rental house across town after his hours got cut at the plant, and by that same afternoon, my mother had decided, without asking me one single question, exactly whose house would fix it. She told me in my kitchen, and I keep saying my kitchen on purpose, because she stood in it like it belonged to her. I was 3 weeks into a new adoption, in leggings and a nursing pillow I didn't even need, Iris asleep against my shoulder, warm as a loaf of bread. My mother set down her coffee, folded her hands, and made an announcement. Marcus, Bree, and the 2 kids would move in the first week of the following month, as soon as the lease officially ended. The children would take the upstairs, meaning my room and Iris's room. Marcus and Bree would need the finished basement I'd just spent a year renovating into an office. I should start looking at rentals, something small, because, and I quote my own mother exactly, "You're strong, Nita. You'll land on your feet. You always do." I actually laughed, one short stunned sound, because for half a second I genuinely thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. I said, "Mom, this is my house." And my mother looked at me with the same tired patience she'd used on me my whole life, the look you give a cashier disputing a coupon, and said the sentence I will hear in my head until I am old. "Make room for your brother's family, Nita. They matter more." Right there, with my 3-week-old daughter breathing against my neck. Not "you've always managed." Not "it's only temporary," the softer language she'd save for relatives later. They matter more. The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the maple scraping the gutter outside. And I did what 33 years of training had built into me. Nothing. I stood there with my mouth full of numbers, the deed, the mortgage, 6 years of overnight flights, and swallowed all of it, because the strong one doesn't make scenes. My mother picked her coffee back up, satisfied, and said Bree would come by Thursday to look at the rooms. She thought my silence meant what it had always meant from me before. She was about to learn otherwise. I gave it one clean, adult try. That night, after Iris's 10 o'clock feeding, I came downstairs, sat across from my mother, and laid it out the way I'd give report at shift change, calm, facts in order. This house is deeded to me. The mortgage is mine. Nobody is moving in, and nobody is moving out, least of all a 2-year-old 3 weeks into a new home. I said Marcus had my sympathy, and if he wanted it, my help finding a rental. I thought it was generous. I thought it was over. My mother listened with her head tilted, then delivered her whole philosophy in one line. Paperwork doesn't make a family, Nita. Sacrifice does. Then she informed me the arrangements were already made, as if reality were simply a casserole schedule, and went to bed in the room I'd given her for free. Around midnight, when I came down for water, I heard her voice through the door, on the phone with my Aunt Colleen, low and easy, reciting details, which weekend the truck was booked, which men from church would carry the furniture, how the boys' beds would fit once Iris's crib came down. The truck was already booked. Before she'd ever said a word to me in that kitchen, the announcement hadn't been a conversation gone wrong. It had been a courtesy call. The next morning, Bree added me to a group chat titled Moving Day, complete with a little truck emoji, 11 relatives already in it, a date already pinned to the top. I stood in my bathroom that afternoon, running a thumb along the edge of the kitchen counter, doing a kind of math no spreadsheet can hold. Then I called my brother, because some part of me still believed in him. Marcus is 26, 7 years behind me, and I practically raised him through Mom's long shifts after Dad's first layoff, walked him to school, taught him to parallel park, co-signed nothing for him after the wedding loan I never saw repaid. I called him on his lunch break and kept my voice kind. I said, "Marcus, I'm so sorry about the house. I know how scared you must be, and I need you to hear this from me directly, not through Mom. You can't move into my home. I'll help you find a place. I'll even help with a deposit. But this house has a 2-year-old in it who just started her whole life over, and it's not available." There was a long pause, Bree's television faint in the background, and then my little brother said, in a voice I barely recognized, "Mom already promised us, Nita. The boys are excited about the yard." And when I said gently that it wasn't Mom's to promise, he sighed like I was the difficult one, like I was traffic, and said, "You're the strong one. You'll be fine anywhere. It's different for us." I got off that call and understood something with the specific clarity you get in triage. My brother was not going to save me, because my brother had never once had to save anyone. That had always been my shift. My Aunt Colleen called an hour later, sugar-voiced, asking if I'd really let my nephews sleep in a shelter, which nobody was in danger of, since Marcus had 2 job leads and a small severance. By supper, cousins I hadn't heard from in years knew a version of the story where I was hoarding a big empty house against homeless children. The family narrative machine was running, and I had spent my whole life feeding that machine my own explanations, watching it grind them into whatever shape my mother needed. So I stopped explaining. I went upstairs, opened the fireproof box in my closet, and read my own name on the deed twice under the lamp. I started reading everything after that. Flight crews carry a legal helpline through the union, one nobody ever uses until their own life catches fire. I called it on my next off day, Iris asleep on my chest, a notepad balanced on my knee, and a patient attorney named Ms. Okonkwo Reyes walked me through the landscape of my own home like a surveyor. "In Michigan," she said, "your mother's lived there 2 years, receives mail there, that likely makes her a tenant at will. You cannot change the locks on her outright. You cannot set her things on the lawn, no matter whose name is on the deed. If you want her out, it's a written notice, 30 days, delivered properly, then court if she refuses to leave. Do it clean or it comes back on you." I wrote it all down like discharge instructions. Then she told me the other half, the half that mattered more. "Your brother and his family are a different category entirely. They don't live there. They've never lived there. If they show up, they're guests, and a guest stays in your home exactly as long as you allow it and not 1 minute longer. If they try to move in without your consent, that's not a family matter. That's trespass, and you can stand behind your locked door and call the non-emergency line with a completely clear conscience." Before she hung up, she said one more thing. "Your mother has rights, and so do you, hun. The only question in these situations is which of you actually uses them." What came next wasn't shouting. Shouting I could have handled. I grew up on it, and I work in emergency rooms, shouting is just weather to me. What came was warmer, and much worse. The shame arrived in casseroles and scripture and voicemails that started with "sweetheart." My Aunt Colleen, twice a day, reminding me that family is all we really have. That my mother buried a husband. That Marcus's boys used to ask about their auntie. Bree posting in the group chat a photo of the boys on an air mattress, caption, "Can't wait for the big yard, so blessed." Every single message had the same architecture. Nobody argued I didn't own the house. Ownership was simply treated as a rude detail, the way you don't mention how the sausage gets made at a church breakfast. And the whole campaign leaned its full weight on the oldest load-bearing beam in my personality. Nita handles things. Nita doesn't make it worse. 11 years in the air teaches you a very particular discipline. When a situation deteriorates, you do not match its energy, you chart it. So I became a paramedic about my own family. I saved every voicemail. I screenshotted the group chat, dated everything, kept a small spiral notebook by the coffee maker with times and quotes. Not because a judge would ever care about Aunt Colleen's opinion of my heart, but because writing a thing down is how you stop it from rewriting you at 2 in the morning. My hands wanted to explain, apologize, smooth things over. Instead, they documented. The strong one was still working the case, but for the first time in her life, the patient was herself. Thursday's visit told me exactly how far ahead of me they already were. Bree came to see the rooms, which I permitted, 10 civil minutes, because some part of me was still performing reasonable for the committee. She walked my upstairs with her phone out, photographing my bedroom, Iris's little sage green room, narrating closet space to Marcus on speaker. At the door, leaving, she jingled her keys at me, a friendly little wave, and on her ring, between a gym fob and a loyalty tag, sat a bright brass key I recognized the way you recognize your own handwriting. My front door key. I asked, evenly, where she'd gotten it. Oh, your mom had copies made a few weeks ago, she said, breezy as a weather report, you know, for the transition. A few weeks ago. I stood in my doorway doing quiet arithmetic while she drove off. A few weeks ago was before Marcus had even lost the lease, which meant the plan predated the emergency, which meant the emergency was the excuse, not the cause. That night, a message meant for a sister-in-law landed in the main group chat by mistake. Bree, to everyone, laughing emoji, Marcus measured the little office last Tuesday, the desk won't fit both boys' beds, it'll have to come out anyway. Last Tuesday, my brother had been inside my house with a tape measure in Iris's future playroom while I was at her pediatrician appointment, and my mother had let him in with a smile and never said one word to me about it. I looked at the brass key hook by my own door, at the neat row of spares I'd hung there like a trusting fool, and felt the house shift around me. Not mine, apparently. Occupied. The only question left was the date. I tried my mother one more time, honestly. Sunday evening, Iris asleep, the two of us at the kitchen table with tea, the same table where she'd made her announcement. I asked her the question I'd been swallowing since I was 9 years old. Mom, when I was putting myself through school working urgent care shifts, where were you? When Dad died and I opened my home to you, who else offered? I've been strong my whole life because there was never anyone standing behind me. So why is it that being strong only ever seems to mean I get less? My mother looked at me a long moment, and I watched something move behind her eyes, something old, and for 1 second I thought we might actually meet each other there. Then it closed. You're the strong one, she said, like it was tender, like it was a compliment being wasted on an ungrateful daughter. Marcus isn't built like you. He needs the ground held for him. You never did. There it was, the family religion recited in my own kitchen. The strong one needs nothing. The strong one is a resource, not a relative. She reached across and patted my hand and said something that would only make sense to me weeks later, at the door, with a box in her arms. You think I don't know what it costs, she said. I know better than you ever will. I didn't understand her yet. I was too tired, too raw, too busy being furious in my quiet way. But hold on to that sentence, the way I held on to it, because in a few weeks she would open it up for me like a locket, and inside would be a print shop in Battle Creek and a version of my mother I'd never met. Then the practical squeeze began, because shame alone wasn't closing the deal. My leave from the base had 6 weeks left on it, half paid. The mortgage didn't care. My emergency fund had survived the adoption fees, but not by much. And my mother, who'd been holding Iris most mornings so I could get an extra hour of sleep, suddenly got very busy. She had church. She had Colleen. She had a headache. If you needed so much help, she observed one afternoon, standing in my kitchen in her coat, maybe you shouldn't be so eager to empty the house of family. There it was. The net being pulled up slowly, so I could watch it happen. She wasn't just declining to help anymore. She was pricing it. Childcare, casseroles, a grandmother's hands at 3 in the morning, all of it available again, the moment I surrendered the keys. I want to be honest with you, because this is the part nobody says out loud. It almost worked. I was 6 weeks in, underslept in a way that feels like being underwater, doing daycare math against a paramedic's salary, and there was a version of the surrender I could dress up as love. Family under one roof, cousins for Iris, my mother's hands back. All it would cost was everything I'd built, and the last of whatever I still was. What held the line wasn't courage. I'll tell you exactly what it was. It was Denise, who started showing up Tuesdays and Fridays with groceries and no commentary, and my neighbor Mr. Halvorsen, 72, who took to sitting on his porch facing my driveway like a small, patient lighthouse. 2 people, neither of them blood, quietly carrying more of my weight than my entire family combined. I noticed who was actually there. I wrote that down too. Iris's 6-week check-in with her pediatrician fell on a Thursday morning, thriving, right on curve, the doctor calling her a tiny linebacker in a onesie, and for 1 full hour I was just a proud mother in a paper-curtained room, no group chat, no casseroles, no keys. We got home a little after 11. My mother's car was in the driveway. Bree's SUV sat behind it. I walked into my own garage carrying my daughter's car seat and stopped like I'd hit glass. Iris's little room had been packed into boxes stacked against the far wall, her toy shelf disassembled into flat panels, her reading chair wrapped in a moving blanket, the mobile I'd hung above her crib, felt clouds, and one small yellow moon, coiled loose in a hardware store bag on top of everything. Inside, upstairs, I could hear my mother's voice in Iris's room, bright and hostessy, telling Bree where the boys' bunk beds would go once the walls got a fresh coat, something less babyish. They hadn't waited for the following month. They hadn't waited for me. My mother had packed up my daughter's room in the house I owned while I sat in a pediatrician's office being told my girl was thriving. I did not go upstairs. I stood in the cool of that garage, one hand on the car seat handle, my other hand flat against a stack of Iris's boxes, and the strangest calm came down over me, the triage calm, the one that arrives when the monitors go bad and there's no more room for feelings, only for the next correct action. I looked down at Iris, asleep, and I whispered it for the first time, just to her. This is our house. Here's what I did not do, and 11 years in the air get the credit. I did not scream. I did not carry those boxes back inside and make a scene for Bree's waiting phone camera, which, believe me, was hungry for exactly that. A clip of unstable Nita would have fed that group chat for a year. I carried my daughter inside, past the room where my mother was mid-sentence about paint colors, and I said pleasantly, "There's coffee in the pot," and went to my bedroom and closed the door. And there, with Iris on my chest, I finally did the thing the strong one had never once been allowed to do. I triaged my own family. Black tag, red tag, green tag. Who can be saved? Who is beyond it? Who is walking wounded? My brother, red tag, salvageable, maybe someday, in a different room of his life, but not by me and not that day. Aunt Colleen and the chorus, black tag, gone, you don't spend compressions on people who were never breathing for you. And my mother, who I had loved with the specific desperate love of a daughter still auditioning at 33. I sat with that one a long time. Then I looked at my sleeping daughter, 2 years old, adopted 3 weeks ago into a family history that would one day make her somebody's strong one too, if I didn't break this thing, this heirloom, this rule the Calder women kept passing down the line like a christening gown soaked in something. And I tagged the audition, not the woman. The audition was over. I picked up my phone and did not text the group chat. I texted the locksmith whose magnet had sat on my fridge for 6 years, Ms. Aconquo-Reyes's direct line, and Denise. 3 short messages, the kind you send when the plan is already whole. Let me stop here and ask you something, one tired person to another. If you've ever been the strong one in your family, the one who handles it, tell me in the comments what it cost you, because I know I'm not the only one. And if this story is landing somewhere real for you, subscribe and stay with me, because the truck is coming. I made one final offer in writing, because I wanted the record to show who tried. I texted Marcus and copied my mother, calm as a discharge summary. I found 3 rentals within 2 miles of the boys' school. I'll pay your first 2 months' deposit myself, tomorrow, as a gift. That's what I can do, and I can do it with love. What I cannot do is give you this house. Iris's home is not on the table. I attached the actual listings, real links, real square footage, a real bridge to a real solution, more than anyone had offered me in 33 years. Bree replied with a thumbs down on the deposit offer, which told me everything about what this had ever actually been about, because people fleeing a genuine housing emergency do not vote down 2 free months of rent. They didn't want shelter. They wanted mine. Then my mother came upstairs and stood in my doorway with a face I'd never once seen pointed at me before, the one she saved for waitresses who got an order wrong. A deposit, she said. You'd pay strangers' rent to keep your own blood out. It wasn't strangers' rent, I said quietly, it was Marcus's, and she was right about one thing: family isn't a lease, because a lease actually gets honored. She didn't laugh. She straightened and delivered her verdict, cold and final as a stamp. They move in the first Sunday of next month. Be reasonable and keep the small room, or don't. That's your choice. Everything in that family, I noticed, was always framed as my choice, right after they'd already made it for me. That week brought a blow I still find hard to fully forgive, and it didn't come directly from my mother, or maybe it did, I'll never prove it either way. Wednesday, 10 in the morning, a knock, a polite woman with a lanyard and a clipboard on my porch. County Child Protective Services. Someone had called in a concern for infant welfare, citing an unstable living situation and a new adoptive mother behaving erratically. She was kind and thorough, and did her job, which I can say now with my blood pressure intact. She saw a clean house, a stocked pantry, a thriving 2-year-old with a pediatric file her mother could produce in 90 seconds, because that mother charts things for a living. 20 minutes, closed, unfounded, have a good day. I shut the door and shook for a solid hour, because understand what had just been attempted. Someone in my family had aimed the machinery of the state at me, at my daughter, weeks into a fragile new adoption, as a pressure tactic in a real estate dispute they were losing. In the group chat that afternoon, Aunt Colleen posted, unprompted, "Well, some people are clearly under too much strain to be making big decisions alone," and my mother replied with a praying hands emoji. I sat with my notebook and wrote down the time. If there had been any road back, any Sunday dinner future where we all pretended that spring never happened, it closed that Wednesday. They hadn't just tried to take my house. They'd tried, even for 20 minutes, to have me reclassified as a danger to the person I loved most in the world. You don't negotiate with that. You don't leave your flank open to it twice. Thursday night after the 10 o'clock feeding, I sat at the kitchen table with 3 documents and did the quietest violence of my life. First, the notice, written the way Ms. Aconcores had walked me through, 30 days, dated, proper. To Diane Calder, you are hereby asked to vacate the premises. My hand didn't shake until the signature, and then it did, and I let it, and signed anyway, understanding that some signatures end a marriage and some end a childhood, and mine was the second kind. I set it on the table where she takes her morning tea, next to the pot, because presentation still matters, apparently, even now, even to me. Second, the locksmith's appointment, held for the exact moment the law allowed and not 1 hour before, because I intended to do every step of this clean enough to survive an audit by God himself. Third, the non-emergency number saved to favorites, and a folder by the front door, deed, mortgage statement, notice copy, my ID, rubber banded together like a go bag for a disaster you can hear coming up the street. Then I sat in my dark kitchen, in the house I bought at 27, and let myself grieve for exactly 1 pot of tea. Not for the house was safe now, or would be. For the version of my mother I'd been inventing since I was a little girl, the one who was going to look up one day and finally see me, and say, "You've done so much, sit down, I'll carry it now." I buried her, quietly, that night at the kitchen table. The real one would find the paperwork at breakfast. My mother found the notice at 7 the next morning. I know, because I was feeding Iris in the rocker upstairs, and the house went a very particular kind of silent, the silence of somebody reading. By the time I came down, she was at the counter in her good coat, suitcase packed, tea unpoured, the notice folded neatly beside the pot like an invitation she was declining. "I won't stay where I'm not wanted," she said, with the serenity of a woman posing for a holy card. Aunt Colleen's, I imagine. When you come to your senses, you know the number. Then she kissed Iris on the head, not me, and wheeled her suitcase down my front walk, spine straight as a fence post, pausing to wave at Mr. Halverson's porch, ensuring a witness. It was masterful. She'd converted a legal notice she couldn't fight into a banishment she got to perform. By noon, the family version was already circulating. Nita served her own widowed mother papers like a stranger, drove her out with a notice on the breakfast table, and the group chat lit up with broken hearts. That evening, Mr. Halverson crossed the yard with a casserole of his own and sat in my kitchen like a small tribunal of one. He's watched 2 wives through their final years, raised 3 kids in that house of his, and he doesn't do preamble. "Honey," he said, "I've watched you shovel that walk alone for 6 winters. I've watched you come home from a night flight and mow at 7 in the morning in July because that grass wasn't going to cut itself. I never once saw a brother out here. I never once saw a moving truck full of help. I know whose house this is, and so does everybody on this street with eyes. I laughed for the first time in what felt like a month, real and a little ugly, and Iris startled and we both laughed harder, and it mattered more than I can explain, not because I needed a jury, but because shame dies in daylight, and Mr. Halvorson was daylight with a casserole dish. The locksmith came Saturday morning. My mother had left of her own accord, taken her things, announced her new residence to the whole family, and texted it to me in writing. The tenancy ended clean, my attorney confirmed, abandoned voluntarily for the sake of the performance. So the locks changed, front, back, garage, new brass, stiff and bright, and a video doorbell with an intercom speaker, which Denise helped me install off a tutorial, 2 paramedics with a drill and a baby monitor propped on the porch rail, supervising. I did not feel triumphant. Changing the locks on your childhood is not a victory lap. It's a tourniquet. You do it because the alternative is bleeding out, and it hurts the whole time it saves you. That week, my mother came back once, alone, for the last box from the guest room. I could have left it on the porch. I didn't. I let her in and watched, because some appointments your heart insists on keeping. At the front door, box in her arms, without me asking, my mother finally opened the locket she'd been carrying since that first conversation. When I was 19, she said, my parents signed the print shop over to your Uncle Walt. 30 years he ran it into the ground, but he was the boy, and the business goes to the boy, that's what my mother told me, standing in her kitchen, the same way you'd say rain's coming. I stood there holding your Uncle Dale on my hip, because I was always holding somebody, and I watched them sign, and then I set the table for supper. Nobody made room for me either, Nita. I carried it. That's what women do. For one long moment I saw her whole, 19 and strong and invisible, standing in a kitchen watching her own inheritance walk out the door to a boy who didn't even want it, and my anger had to move over and make room for something worse, which was understanding. My mother hadn't authored this. She was a page in it, and she'd spent 40 years insisting the sentence that broke her was just grammar. They were wrong, Mom, I said softly, and you're doing it to me now. She looked at me, adjusted the box on her hip, said it kept the family together, and walked to her car. Denise came Friday with groceries and stayed to ask the only question that still needed asking. Walk me through Sunday, she said, and don't give me the flight voice. So I laid out the price sheet, because I'd run it 100 times in the dark. If I held the line, I kept the house and likely lost my mother, maybe for good. Women like Diane Calder don't forgive being survived. I'd be the villain at every wedding and funeral for a decade, the daughter who chose paperwork over people, and Marcus's boys would grow up on a story about mean Aunt Nita. If I folded, I'd get my mother's hands back, Sunday dinners, the wide warm lie of family under one roof, and the deed would still say Calder, just the wrong one eventually, and my daughter would inherit the christening gown too, the one soaked in it, the strong ones rule, they matter more. Denise listened, and then asked it plainly. Someday Iris is going to hear this whole story, probably from you, in this exact kitchen. Which version do you want to be telling her? And there it was. Not whether I could survive being disliked, I'd survived worse, that was never the real question. The question was which story got told in this kitchen 20 years from now, and who my daughter would learn to be while listening to it. Before Sunday comes, I want your honest answer, not the polite one. Standing in my kitchen, mother on one side, deed on the other, would you have opened that door? Tell me in the comments, truly, no judgment, some of you have carried exactly this. And if you're new here, subscribe, because the truck arrives in the morning. Saturday night, after the 10 o'clock feed, I couldn't sleep, and for once it wasn't dread, it was inventory. At 2 in the morning I went to the garage and carried my daughter's boxes back upstairs, piece by piece, and rebuilt her little room exactly as it had been, the reading chair unwrapped, the shelf reassembled, the mobile hung and wound until it turned once, plinking its small tune into the quiet, felt clouds catching the lamplight. When it stood finished, I sat down on the floor of my daughter's room, in my house, and looked at it the way you look at a campfire. Downstairs, the new locks held. Across town, a loaded truck sat waiting. In the morning, my family was coming for this room, and the room stood ready, small and sage green, and completely spoken for. Sunday. I fed Iris at 5 in the gray light, her fist curled around my finger, and I looked out at the yard, the walk I'd shoveled alone for 6 winters, the maple I'd paid a man too much to trim, the grass I'd mowed enormous with nerves the week before her adoption hearing. Every square foot of that view had my receipts on it. I did not rehearse anything. There was nothing left to rehearse. I did a flight medic's morning, shower, coffee, checked the folder by the door, checked the doorbell camera angle, tested the intercom once by text with Denise, checked my own vitals, hand steady, breath even. At 8:40, an engine turned onto Larkspur Court, pulling something heavy. The locksmith came Saturday morning. My mother had left of her own accord, taken her things, announced her new residence to the whole family, and texted it to me in writing. The tenancy ended clean, my attorney confirmed, abandoned voluntarily for the sake of the performance. So the locks changed, front, back, garage, new brass, stiff and bright, and a video doorbell with an intercom speaker, which Denise helped me install off a tutorial, 2 paramedics with a drill and a baby monitor propped on the porch rail, supervising. I did not feel triumphant. Changing the locks on your childhood is not a victory lap. It's a tourniquet. You do it because the alternative is bleeding out, and it hurts the whole time it saves you. That week, my mother came back once, alone, for the last box from the guest room. I could have left it on the porch. I didn't. I let her in and watched, because some appointments your heart insists on keeping. At the front door, box in her arms, without me asking, my mother finally opened the locket she'd been carrying since that first conversation. When I was 19, she said, my parents signed the print shop over to your Uncle Walt. 30 years he ran it into the ground, but he was the boy, and the business goes to the boy, that's what my mother told me, standing in her kitchen, the same way you'd say rain's coming. I stood there holding your Uncle Dale on my hip, because I was always holding somebody, and I watched them sign, and then I set the table for supper. Nobody made room for me either, Nita. I carried it. That's what women do. For one long moment I saw her whole, 19 and strong and invisible, standing in a kitchen watching her own inheritance walk out the door to a boy who didn't even want it, and my anger had to move over and make room for something worse, which was understanding. My mother hadn't authored this. She was a page in it, and she'd spent 40 years insisting the sentence that broke her was just grammar. They were wrong, Mom, I said softly, and you're doing it to me now. She looked at me, adjusted the box on her hip, said it kept the family together, and walked to her car. Denise came Friday with groceries and stayed to ask the only question that still needed asking. Walk me through Sunday, she said, and don't give me the flight voice. So I laid out the price sheet, because I'd run it 100 times in the dark. If I held the line, I kept the house and likely lost my mother, maybe for good. Women like Diane Calder don't forgive being survived. I'd be the villain at every wedding and funeral for a decade, the daughter who chose paperwork over people, and Marcus's boys would grow up on a story about mean Aunt Nita. If I folded, I'd get my mother's hands back, Sunday dinners, the wide warm lie of family under one roof, and the deed would still say Calder, just the wrong one eventually, and my daughter would inherit the christening gown too, the one soaked in it, the strong ones rule, they matter more. Denise listened, and then asked it plainly. Someday Iris is going to hear this whole story, probably from you, in this exact kitchen. Which version do you want to be telling her? And there it was. Not whether I could survive being disliked, I'd survived worse, that was never the real question. The question was which story got told in this kitchen 20 years from now, and who my daughter would learn to be while listening to it. Before Sunday comes, I want your honest answer, not the polite one. Standing in my kitchen, mother on one side, deed on the other, would you have opened that door? Tell me in the comments, truly, no judgment, some of you have carried exactly this. And if you're new here, subscribe, because the truck arrives in the morning. Saturday night, after the 10 o'clock feed, I couldn't sleep, and for once it wasn't dread, it was inventory. At 2 in the morning I went to the garage and carried my daughter's boxes back upstairs, piece by piece, and rebuilt her little room exactly as it had been, the reading chair unwrapped, the shelf reassembled, the mobile hung and wound until it turned once, plinking its small tune into the quiet, felt clouds catching the lamplight. When it stood finished, I sat down on the floor of my daughter's room, in my house, and looked at it the way you look at a campfire. Downstairs, the new locks held. Across town, a loaded truck sat waiting. In the morning, my family was coming for this room, and the room stood ready, small and sage green, and completely spoken for. Sunday. I fed Iris at 5 in the gray light, her fist curled around my finger, and I looked out at the yard, the walk I'd shoveled alone for 6 winters, the maple I'd paid a man too much to trim, the grass I'd mowed enormous with nerves the week before her adoption hearing. Every square foot of that view had my receipts on it. I did not rehearse anything. There was nothing left to rehearse. I did a flight medic's morning, shower, coffee, checked the folder by the door, checked the doorbell camera angle, tested the intercom once by text with Denise, checked my own vitals, hand steady, breath even. At 8:40, an engine turned onto Larkspur Court, pulling something heavy. The U-Haul took 2 passes to park, which gave the street time to notice. Behind it came Bree's SUV, then Aunt Colleen's sedan, a little convoy of certainty. From the kitchen window I watched them arrange themselves on my front walk like a family portrait, Marcus in a ball cap already looking tired, Bree pointing the boys toward the yard, and in the center, my mother, in her good spring coat, phone already in her hand, dialing, because the plan was obvious and almost touching in its confidence. Mom calls, Nita softens, the door opens, the truck empties, and by supper the story writes itself. Across the street, right on schedule, Mr. Halverson's screen door creaked, and he settled into his chair with his coffee, a one-man jury with excellent sightlines. They didn't knock first. Marcus lowered the truck's ramp, metal on metal, loud on purpose. Bree propped my own screen door open with a box. And only then, with the unloading already begun, did my mother press call. My phone lit up on the counter. Mom. I let it ring twice, then answered, and her voice came through warm, the thing I'd forgotten to armor against, the warmth from fevers and skinned knees, before I understood the pricing model. Nita, sweetheart, look out your window, it's everybody, it's your whole family. Enough now. Open the door and everything goes back to how it was. I'll come home. I'll help with the baby. All you have to do is open the door. I stood at the window and felt the pull, the sweet old undertow, one yes, one turned latch, and I'd be inside the family again, warm and fed and owned. Iris made a small sound against my shoulder, milk and sleep, the sound of a person whose entire world is whoever is holding her. My mother's love back, or the woman my daughter would grow up watching me be. I'd finally learned those were not the same purchase. Mom, I said, my voice even, and she went quiet, hopeful. I'm going to hang up now. There's a speaker by the door. I ended the call, set the phone on the counter, and walked my daughter to the intercom panel. Through the doorbell camera, the fisheye view showed all of them, my mother closest, phone still raised, Marcus halfway up the walk with a box marked boys' room, Aunt Colleen's chin already lifted for the confrontation she dressed for. I stood in my front hall, Iris against my shoulder, thumb over the button, and I pressed it, and said the sentence I'd whispered to my daughter over her rebuilt little room the night before, even and unhurried. This is our house. That's all. No mortgage numbers. No deed book and page, though I know them by heart. No accounting of what 33 years had cost. Explanation had been the tax I'd paid my whole life, and the audit was finally over. On the camera, I watched my mother's face do something I had never once seen it do. Stop. The script died in her hand. Her phone slipped, hit the brick edging of my flower bed, and cracked face down on the walk, glass on stone, sharp as a bell in the Sunday quiet. Marcus set his box down slowly, like it had suddenly tripled in weight, which in a way it had. Aunt Colleen surged for the doorbell, jabbed it, hollered about family and shame loud enough for the street to hear, exactly as I'd expected. I said, calmly, you're on camera. You're trespassing, and the police have already been called. Then I stepped back and let the morning do its work. The non-emergency officers arrived in 11 minutes, no lights, no drama, 2 professionals who'd clearly seen 100 driveways like mine. I opened the door for them, only for them, and handed over the folder, deed, mortgage, the notice, my mother's own text about not living where she isn't wanted. It took about a quarter hour to unwind. One officer explained patiently to my brother that ownership wasn't in dispute, that the county records were a phone screen away, that nobody currently resided there but the owner and her daughter, and that the truck needed to load its ramp and go. Marcus went first, and he looked relieved, ordered off my property lighter, because a uniform had finally taken the decision out of everyone's hands, which was the only place my brother had ever been comfortable keeping decisions. Bree loaded her propping box back into the truck, jaw set for a story she was already editing in her head. Aunt Colleen announced she'd pray for me. And my mother stood one more minute alone on my walk, cracked phone in her hand, looking at the door. I didn't press the intercom again. Forgiveness and an open door are different sacraments. She got into Colleen's sedan, and the street emptied, and it was over. When the last engine faded off Larkspur Court, I stepped out onto my own porch with my daughter into the ordinary morning sunshine, and on the walk, a small spray of phone glass glittered in the flower bed brick. Across the street, Mr. Halvorson lifted his coffee mug about an inch, the way you'd toast a ship coming into harbor, no fuss, all meaning. "Coffee's on," he called, "whenever you two are ready." And that's when I cried, not during the announcement in spring, not over the boxes in the garage, not signing the notice, not with my thumb on that intercom button. I cried on my own porch in the sunshine, my daughter waking against my neck, and it wasn't only loss, it was the specific bone-deep weeping of a woman finally setting down something she'd carried so long she'd grown around it. 6 weeks later, Marcus and Bree took an apartment 2 miles from the boys' school, one of the exact listings I'd sent, and the 2 months deposit went through on a payment app, accepted within the hour, no message attached. I didn't need one, the accepting was the sentence. My mother stayed with Colleen a while, then moved in with Marcus and Bree, and by late summer I was hearing through cousins who still quietly spoke to me that she had opinions about Bree's kitchen and the boys' bedtimes, and whose name was on that new lease. It cost exactly what I said it would cost. My mother has not apologized. Women like her rarely have the language installed for it. I am the villain in a story told at tables I'm no longer invited to, and some evenings that still aches like weather in an old fracture. "You're the strong one," they always said, meaning you can take it, meaning we don't have to ask. They were half right. I could take it. Strong was never a reason for someone to take things from me, though. I've retired it from my house. In the fall, a letter came, my mother's careful cursive, no apology in it, 2 pages about the weather at Marcus's, about the boys, and 1 sentence at the end doing all the work. "Whatever you think of me, I am still your mother." I read it twice at the kitchen table, then put it in the box where I keep Iris's adoption bracelet, because both of those things are true at once, and neither one opens a door. If you carry one thing out of my story, carry this. Love that has to be paid like rent will never actually buy you a home. Build the home first, on your own name, and then let in only the people who knock softly. I spent 33 years tipping my own family for the privilege of a chair, and the day I stopped paying, I found out the chair had been mine the whole time. If you're the strong one in your family, if your yes has been collected for so long they've stopped even bothering to ask, hear me from my porch, your name on your own life is not selfishness, it's a deed. If this story found you, subscribe to Hidden Chapters and tell me in the comments what you finally put down. I read every single one. Until next time, keep your locks kind, and your boundaries kinder.